appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come. And I understand that, you know, the union wasn't really encouraging people to come to this meeting. Come on in, folks, have a seat. There's water and coffee over here on the wall if you'd like something. The union wasn't really encouraging people to come to this meeting. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really understand it, because when I fought for right to work to be passed in Michigan, and I was a spokesman for a group called Michigan Freedom to Work. I still am the spokesman for that group, as a matter of fact. I fought for it because I honestly, in my heart, believe that right to work empowers the union workers, and by empowering the union workers and allowing them to hold their union officials accountable, it would improve the performance of the union and would help keep them honest and focused on the issues that we think are important. Unfortunately, after right to work was passed, and I was out in Lansing on that 2 or 3 day period when there were mass protests out there and the union was fighting against passage of right to work law, I expected the union to be, respond positively and maybe try to improve their performance and become more responsive to our concerns, and they've reacted the exact opposite way. Prime example is for us in the UAW. For those of you that are UAW members, you're probably familiar with the fact that the UAW spent $300 million, give or take, from our strike fund. Our strike fund balance had climbed to well over $900 million. It was very healthy, it was in good shape. But last year, the UAW leadership announced to us that they had spent over $300 million on other things besides paying people who are on strike, and they'd run it down low enough they didn't feel comfortable going into collective bargaining talks with it being at the level that it was at. So they were going to vote on a proposal to increase our dues from the traditional 2 hours a month that it had been for some 50 years up to 2.5 hours a month, about a 25% increase. At that time, I had been a UAW member, dues-paying UAW member, for well over 17 years, and I decided I needed to run for convention delegate to try to go down to that UAW convention in Detroit and vote no on the dues increase. Traditionally, the UAW has always gotten their revenue increases year to year by negotiating during the contract cycle to get us a base pay raise, and that had been going on for decades. If we got a 3 or 4% increase over the course of the 4-year contract or 3-year contract, whichever the length was, their revenue automatically went up, because 2 hours at $28 an hour is worth more than 2 hours at $26 an hour. So that's how the revenue increases were achieved back then. And I felt that it should stay that way. I didn't feel that the members should be penalized and forced to repay the strike fund for monies that they had spent out of it without coming to us and asking us. When I ran for convention delegate at my plant, the Sterling Axle plant, 98–99% of the people that I talked to were against the dues increase. And for the same reasons I just mentioned, they didn't feel they should be penalized and have to pay more because the leadership had spent our money out of our strike fund. I came up short in that election. I got 174 votes, which was not quite enough to get elected delegate. I wasn't even elected alternate delegate. I was a little bit short on that. And so I wasn't able to go to the convention and vote no and tell them why I didn't feel it was appropriate. So at that point, I decided that I would file for my Beck rights as a Beck objector. I would resign from the union, and I would only pay the portion of my dues that covers my collective bargaining costs, which is your collective bargaining itself, representation, and the grievance procedure. That's approximately 60 to 65% of full dues. So I sent my letter in to the UAW International. I resigned from the union. I requested for them to reduce my dues to reflect that resignation, and I identified myself as a Beck objector, and a couple months later my dues were reduced, and I am now a non-member paying an agency fee. That's the way that worked. When I went through that whole process, it was not easy, it was not simple, but the information was available, and I had fought for right to work, and I was vaguely familiar with what our rights were and what the process was for people who did not want to belong to the union. And I found that when I came, when word got around and in the plant, people started coming up to me when they found out that I had resigned from the union. They came up to me and started asking me questions. They thought that maybe I was an at-will employee, that I could be fired at any time. They thought maybe the union contract didn't apply to me anymore. Well, those things are false. If you resign from the union and you're paying a non-member agency fee as a non-union member, like I am right now, you're still covered by the union contract because you haven't left the bargaining unit. The contract still applies to you, and Bill's going to talk about why that is, and believe it or not, a lot of it has to do with the union security clauses, and exclusive representation agreements that they sign with the company. So everybody in the bargaining unit, whether you're in the union or not, whether you pay dues or not, is going to be covered by the terms of the contract. They still have to represent me because I'm in that bargaining unit, and if the company's violating any terms of the contract, they have to represent that employee, whether they're in the union or not, to keep the management from violating terms of the contract. A quick example: if I work a Saturday and I don't get paid, my hours are wrong, and I see that. Even though I'm a non-member, I can still go to my UAW committee man and ask him to get with my supervisor to make sure I get a pay correction put in. Sometimes it's a little difficult. That's what we pay union dues for when you're a dues paying member, and you expect your committee man will get it taken care of. I still am able to do that because I'm a member of the bargaining unit. Now, they're not smiling about it if I go to them and ask them to do something, but they're legally obligated to do it. Now, I don't know if you've realized the conflict here, but let me just tell you, somebody asked in the last town hall, but aren't you still paying for the collective bargaining portion of the dues? Yeah, I am. I'm still paying an agency fee which covers the collective bargaining, the representation, and the representation, collective bargaining grievance procedure. So I'm still paying for that, even though I'm a non-member. But the union's not happy about having to fulfill their obligations, even though I'm still paying that portion of my dues as a non-member. So you still get those protections, you're still under the contract, and you don't give up anything as far as pay, benefits, even extending out into retirement. Those things are all funded by the company, and they cannot be touched or changed by the union because you're no longer a member. So just to reassure you on that stuff, that is the situation if you decided to use your BEC rights. Quick question?
Does that come out of your pay, or do you have to go down to international and pay that separate?
No, I haven't ended the dues checkoff thing yet, so that still comes out of my pay, just like the dues did, but it's reduced down to about 60, for me right now it's about 62% of what my dues were.
Can the union ever say, I don't want to take your 60-65% and you can't use us as your agent?
No, even if they did that, they would still be legally obligated to represent me because I'm still in the bargaining unit.
Okay.
Okay, now, before I go any further, let me just back up a little bit. I want to say for the record, I am a 100% supporter of collective bargaining. It's a very important process, especially when you're in a major manufacturing business like the automobile industry. Collective bargaining is very important. It's not going away. Right to work does not threaten collective bargaining. It's going to be there. Trust me. The things that the union has accomplished over its lifetime, since back in the 1940s when the UAW was originally established, they've done some great things for blue-collar workers and manufacturers, auto workers in particular. I feel very fortunate to be working at an automobile plant that's had the benefit of collective bargaining for all that length of time. They accomplished a lot of great things, but a lot of those things were accomplished 70 years ago, back in the 40s and 50s. Much of it's been incorporated into federal law, the safety laws, and we need to, again, thank the union for pushing a lot of those things, but the fact remains they've been absorbed into federal law. Another thing that the union deserves some credit for is the wages and benefits that the non-union auto companies pay their workers down south, Toyota, Volkswagen, Honda, Nissan, places like that. It's true, the union deserves some credit for setting the standard up here in the heavily industrialized states, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania. Yeah, they set some standards, and we owe them thanks. The people at Toyota and Volkswagen wouldn't be paying being paid what they're getting or receiving the benefits they're getting had it not been for the battles that were fought by the UAW decades ago. But again, the fact remains, those standards are there now. The auto industry has set a standard for auto workers, and you know, it's not going to dramatically change if 5% or 10% of the UAW represented workers start holding their union officials accountable and resign from the union. It's not going to make a big dent in their revenue, and in my mind, I think it's actually going to help the union improve by becoming more accountable to us. If we start to speak up about things like this $300 million they spent out of our strike fund, and say several hundred people send in a letter of resignation to the International Union and put a note on there, I'm resigning because to recoup some of the money you've taken from me and increased dues because you spent money out of our strike fund. Now, later on, after Bill gives his presentation on the law, I'm going to throw out a couple of quick scenarios and examples of ways that I think we could use right to work to pressure the union leadership to reduce our dues back down to the 2 hours, the traditional 2 hours a month that they had taken for some 50 years. And I'll explain that a little bit later after Bill explains the process, and I'll give you an example of how I think we can use it to our advantage. And this is what I fought for all along when I was supporting the passage of right to work, was the empowerment of the workers to hold their union leadership accountable. It's not to destroy the unions. It's not that I'm out to try and hurt the unions or make them go away. I want our agent who does our collective bargaining, which is our union, to do a better job of it, be more accountable and more responsible and more receptive to our suggestions, our voices, and our issues that we feel are important. Okay, let me give you a quick overview of how the meeting's going to go. I'll finish up my remarks here in a second. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. He's from the Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. They came here today at no charge to us to explain the law. Mr. Messenger is a labor law attorney who's argued cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He's very well versed in labor law, and he's got some very important points to talk about. Your Beck rights, how we are affected under Michigan's new right to work law, which has not taken effect yet for us in the UAW because our contract hasn't expired. And he's going to talk about union security clauses, which play into how we're still covered by the contract even though we're no longer in the union if you opt out, and exclusive representation clauses, which also bear on that. So he'll explain all of that, and then we will open it up. Then I'll come back up and throw out a couple of quick examples of how I think we can use these laws to make the union get better representative of our voice, and pressure them to act more in our interests, not their own interests. Remember, we elect union officials to work for us. Somewhere along the line, that's gotten lost, and the union officials, especially way up at the top, have begun to think that we work for them. Well, we elected them to work for us. So in a sense, I guess you could say we're their bosses. And I use the term, and I know it rubs some people wrong, and there's at least one individual in here who I know it really rubs the wrong way. I use the term union bosses a lot. I'm not talking about the people we elect at the local level. I'm not talking about people that get elected at the lower levels of the union. I'm talking about when they get that call to go downtown to Solidarity House or Region 1, and then all the promotions they get from there, all the positions they get offered and move into, they're not voted on by us. They're decided on by the other hand-picked people who are down there. And you've got to really toe the line and meet a certain litmus test in order to get promoted all the way up to where Dennis Williams is as president of the UAW. We don't get to vote directly on that. And I get it, you know, you elect people and then they make decisions for you, but we're pretty removed from that process. And I think that's part of the problem. Along the way, the leadership, the top leadership at the international level of the unions has gotten separated from what the original intent and purpose of unions were when they were formed 70, 80 years ago, back in the early 1900s. So try to understand, my motivation is not to destroy unions. It's certainly not to get rid of collective bargaining. It's a very, very important process, and I support it 100%. But to have collective bargaining, you have to have an agent to do your collective bargaining. And my concerns and issues are with our agent, our unions, who have become separated. They've gotten into bed with one political party, and it's not the party I vote for, and they've turned the union membership into a fundraising mechanism, and they've turned the unions into an ATM for one political party, and they're funneling money to that political party. Now, I would have less of a problem with their political activity personally. This is just my opinion. I'd have less of a problem with it if their political activities were balanced between the two parties. Now, you've heard the criticism of Republicans that, oh, they're all for big business. They just take care of big business. Well, when I walk into work every day and look around at Ford Motor Company, I'm at the Sterling plant. That at one time was the biggest axle plant on the face of the planet Earth. I am at a big business. What would be wrong with my union working, when possible, with the Republican Party? If you're going to be involved in politics, why are you pitting one party against another? Why aren't you working with both of them when it's to your advantage? So I would either like to see a more balanced approach to their political involvement, or a complete reduction of their political involvement just to the very core issues, like these trade policies that they're working on now. Something like that I can understand, the trade policies that are going to directly impact their members. Sure, that would be great. But they've actually, the UAW, I know for a fact, because I watched it happen, they've actually done things that were counterproductive to their own membership. Back in 2004, some of you might remember there was a ballot initiative on the ballot that the voters got to vote on, and that's when they go around and collect a certain number of signatures and to get something on the ballot, and then the question's voted on by the voters to pass it. It was a traditional marriage constitutional amendment to put it in the Constitution and define marriage in the Michigan Constitution as between one man and one woman. And there were polls done on it. I think the one that I read recently was done by the Free Press, of specifically union members, because the union had gotten heavily involved in that fight. They were fighting against the amendment that said marriage is between one man and one woman. They were against it because they have a very, very aggressive GLBT agenda to promote this gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender agenda. And that's a civil rights issue. If you want to support that kind of stuff, that's fine. That's your business. I'm not criticizing people who those are their views. But to use my dues money, and they made a $10 million contribution that was pooled with other unions to go into a fund to run commercials around the state of Michigan prior to that election and vote. They wanted people to vote no on that. They did not want marriage to be defined in the Michigan Constitution as between one man and one woman. Well, I strongly object to that kind of political activism with my dues money. My personal views, and again, you're entitled to your own, that's your business, but my personal views are marriage is a sacred institution between one man and one woman, and I don't want the dues I pay at work to have people represent me and collectively bargain for me diverted for a civil rights issue like that I may not agree with. And this Free Press poll that was done showed that almost 70% of union households were in favor of that one man, one woman definition. But the UAW, my union, donated $10 million to that fund, along with all the other unions put in $1 million here, a couple million there. They had a huge pot of money to run commercials, ads, over and over and over to get people to oppose that constitutional amendment. Well, it did end up passing. I think it was 58% to 42%. The constitutional amendment passed, but that's all working its way through the courts now. The point being, I don't pay dues at work, or I didn't pay dues at work at that time, to have that money diverted to liberal social political activism like that. Now that's just an example of why I was upset with my union. I've talked to a lot of people at my plant. Some people are upset about the $300 million that got spent out of our strike fund. Other people are unhappy with the level of representation that we have at our plant, the response of the union when they have an issue they want work done. Everybody has their own concern, and that's your That's your business. What we all have in common is we have a tool now, since Right to Work passed, that we can use to pressure our union to become better, to become more representative, and to become more accountable to our concerns. And that's Right to Work. The law allows us to opt out of the union, or even threaten to opt out of the union, because now the union leadership knows we can, and you're going to learn today exactly how to do that. And that allows us to influence our union leadership. It's really hard to get change within the union, I found, through elections and voting. A lot of the votes are controlled by people who had control of the hiring process, giving out applications. They've got a block, a base of support within the plants, and if they want to go one way on a vote, they control or sway a lot of those votes. I'm not saying you can't change the process through the elections and voting on issues, but it's difficult. And you know, if you're not on the union page and you're not in line with what they want to happen, it makes it harder to get elected or to get something voted on the way you want it to happen. So we now have a tool, and it's money, and we have the ability to stop paying them. If you're going to a restaurant and they're serving you poor food, you will not keep going back there and paying them if you're not getting the service that you think that their prices are charging, right? So the union's the same way. They're a service organization, and we can influence them and get them to improve their service to us and respond to us better by threatening to withhold our dues, either by filing as a Beck objector and only paying for a portion of the dues to cover your collective bargaining costs, or after September in the UAW to opt out completely and not have to pay anything. Now, I'm not encouraging anybody to do what I did, but I'm very glad you're here to get the information to know that you can do it, and if the union knows that you know how to do it and that you can do it without any risk or repercussions, and that's what Bill's going to explain to you, then they hopefully will listen to us. They'll look at us a little bit differently. They'll respect our concerns and complaints more, and they will improve over the long term. So that's the entire objective of this town hall today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bill Messenger. Like I said, Bill's from the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. He's argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. He knows labor law very well. He's going to run through the laws that impact on us: Beck rights, right to work law, exclusive representation agreements, and the union security clauses. Those things all affect us. We need to know how they affect us, how we can use them, and what our rights are in the workplace. And I think, hopefully, at the end of the day, you'll feel empowered with this knowledge, and you will feel like you have more of a say in the workplace, and you will realize, once again, that the people you elected in your union are there to work for you, not the other way around. Thank you.
You know, I have a question.
Quickly, go ahead.
Because I've worked in a lot of places, union, non-union.
Yep.
Okay? Company has final word on what they're gonna pay you. Can you imagine all these?
We're under contract, man. They have no final say during the course of a contract. The union negotiates that, am I right, Ted? And then they have to stick to it. The union, that's their role. Can we hold the questions till the end of Bill's
I would say no to that,
presentation,
Brian, because
please?
the contract was opened up and we take.
Okay, yeah, the contract, if the union agrees to open up the contract, good point, Ted, they had to open it up, and we did, we had our pay frozen 2 contracts ago. So that's true, it can happen, but it wasn't the company having a final say. They had to go to the union and ask them, and they got approval. We ended up voting for it because
But it was the company that took the money,
our very,
not the union, right?
our very-
To your point.
our very survival depended on it at the time. And the
Do you work for
membership
anybody
vote.
else? Do you work for anybody else or
Excuse-
just Ford?
Excuse me. We're
'Cause
gonna give
do you work for Jack Brandenburg?
we're gonna give a presentation right now.
Jack Brandenburg is the finance, he's the majority rep.
Hold
he's
on,
the
you're
Tea Party
not,
guy.
sir, excuse me, I'm gonna give you a
This
warning,
guy's a
hey,
shill
I'm
for
gonna give you a
the
one
right-wing
warning,
party.
if
He's
you
a
want,
shill
if you
for
wanna
Dick
leave,
DeVos. He's
All
a
right.
shill, that's what you are, and you're trying to
All right.
break unions. That's
you're
what you're doing.
disrupting the meeting, I'm
Hey,
gonna
listen,
have to
is this
ask,
an open debate or
I'm
not?
gonna, no, it's not a debate, it's not a debate. Do you wanna listen to this presentation?
No, I wanna
We're
see
gonna
if
let
you're
you
gonna
make,
take
we're gonna
questions.
let you make
I'm gonna
comments
tell
at
you
the
this,
end.
if you put your hands on me,
You know what?
I don't like what happened.
Hey Tom, this guy's gonna have to leave, I'm asking you to
So, are you
leave.
security here?
I'm asking you to leave.
Are you security here? Okay.
He's
For
a
the-
police,
for the
he's a
company-
police officer. You wanna give him a hard time, go ahead. But I'm asking you to leave because
all
these
I'm saying-
people here came to get information.
Oh, I bet they
You
do.
obviously
But
came
they
to
don't
disrupt
know-
the meeting.
They don't know what you're
Tom,
doing.
he needs to
This
go.
is him and Jack
He needs to go.
Brandenburg,
Yep,
who's
that's,
majority whip.
that's me.
And
Nice
this is
picture
him.
too. Hey, can you
This
leave
is
that
him
on the
and
table?
Scott Walker,
Tom, he's gotta go.
Lincoln, hanging
We
out
don't have
partying
time.
together. Let
Yep.
me tell you this, you're
You're outta here.
You ain't
See ya.
throwing me out of shit. I've been thrown out of better places, I'll tell you that.
Okay, well, you're
Anybody
thrown out of
else
here
who
now.
has-
Add this to your
Anybody
list.
else who has any common sense
on, bud,
would
let's go.
get up and don't touch me. I'm gonna tell you this right now because if you touch
Listen,
me,
you came
I'm
to
gonna say
disrupt,
no,
you
I'm
came to
not.
disrupt this
This is an
meeting. I'm
aggressive
asking you to
manner.
leave. All right, I'll call the house security and they have Sterling Heights. They'll come and take you out.
Show me your
Let's
ID.
go.
No, show me your
Come on
ID.
outside.
Show me your ID.
Let's go.
Anybody listens to
You
this
want
guy and
Sterling-
you're
you want
union
Sterling
worker,
Heights to come?
the
I got him right here on
does not
speed
care
dial.
about you.
See ya.
The union is looking out for
See
your
ya.
best interest. I'm telling you.
You
right
wanna
now.
tell people
Just like
something?
the young lady
Rent a
said-
room.
Just like the young lady said.
Hit the
company is the
road.
one taking your
Listen,
money.
it's not
The
your,
union is
it's not
fighting
your
for
town hall.
Record this.
See ya. Have a nice day.
Anybody with any common sense that works for a union, understand this.
We don't work
Company
for a
doesn't-
union.
the
We
company
don't
works
work
with
for a
you.
union. We
The
work for a
doesn't have
company.
your best interest
Tom,
in
he's
mind.
gotta go. We don't have a whole lot of time.
Nobody leaving?
Adios. Just you, pal. You're leaving. You're leaving. See ya. Okay, so now we can continue with the meeting. He came just to make a scene. We've got other people here who are big supporters of the union, people who've been union officials, people who are big critics of me, but they're not going to disrupt this meeting. As a matter of fact, I'm on friendly terms with a few people in the union, and we can have good personal relationships. I am not trying to attack unions. I am not trying to destroy unions. I'm trying to make them better. So you can believe that if you want to, or you can believe the nonsense this guy's talking. Did I work for Senator Jack Brandenburg for 3 years? Yes, I did. I was his district aide. But that has absolutely nothing to do with this. I told you at the beginning of this meeting, I'm a conservative, I vote Republican. That's part of the reason I'm upset with my union is they're in bed with one political party. It's not the party I vote for or believe in. So yeah, that part of it's true. But he came here not to get information, just to disrupt the meeting. So we'll go ahead with this. You guys came here to get information. We'll let Bill give his presentation now.
Sure.
And then I'll get up at the end, give you a couple quick examples of how we think we can use this information to help make the unions better, more accountable, and then we'll open it up to questions. Bill's presentation is only about 25, 30 minutes, so it'll be relatively short.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. And what I'd like to do is just give a general overview of your rights regarding union membership and dues obligations. And in particular, talk about 3 subjects. Your right to be a union member or a non-member, your right with respect to paying union dues and fees, and how to exercise those rights if you so choose. But the one thing I'm not here today is to advocate that you exercise your rights in any particular way. Whether you want to be a union member or not a union member is completely up to you. Nor am I really have any opinion on whether this particular union is good or this particular union is bad or doing a good job or a bad job. I don't really have an opinion on that. Instead, just want to stick to an overview of what your rights and options are, and then you can choose for yourself how you wish to exercise them. So the first topic is your right to be a union member and non-member. Federal law, the National Labor Relations Act, guarantees every employee the right to either be a union member or the right not to be a union member. And it is generally illegal for either an employer or a union to restrict that right. So to start with an employer cannot say, I'm not going to hire someone because he's a union member, or not pay him the same wage as someone who's non-union. Conversely, an employer cannot require that an employee become a union member to keep their job or to get a benefit. Now, as we'll discuss in a little bit, in non-right-to-work situations, employees can be required to pay certain fees to a union to keep their job. But full union membership can never be required. Full union membership requirement is what used to be called a closed shop. It means to work somewhere, you had to be a union member. Those have been illegal since 1947. They don't exist in this country. So everyone who, if you're an hourly employee, has the right to either be a member or a non-member of a union. Now, a question that frequently arises is, if I'm represented by a union, does that mean I'm a union member? Or if I work at a union plant, am I a union member? And the answer is no. There's a difference between union representation and between union membership. Union representation means it's the authority of a union under the National Labor Relations Act to exclusively represent everyone in a particular bargaining unit or in a particular workplace. And that gives the union the right to speak on behalf of everyone in that unit for purposes of dealing with their employer. But that doesn't necessarily make you a union member. Full union membership is actually joining the organization, much like you would join any other organization, the Rotary Club or National Rifle Association or any other kind of club. It becomes becoming a member of that organization, but it's not the same as representation. And so an example I like to give is analogize, and it's not a perfect analogy, to political representation. My understanding is this congressional district is represented by Candace Miller, Representative Candace Miller. She's a Republican. She has the authority to represent everyone in this district in Congress. But that doesn't make everyone in this district a member of the Republican Party. You can become a member if you want, or you can become a member of a different party or not join either. So she has the authority to represent everyone, but you're not necessarily a member. With the union, it's very much similar, but obviously focused in the workplace and vis-a-vis the employer. Now, another question that comes up is, what is the implications of being a union member or a non-member? And the basic rule of thumb is it will not affect your choice of membership, your relations with your employer, but it will affect your relationships with the union in terms of its internal affairs. So let's start with the employer. As I mentioned earlier, an employer cannot discriminate against someone on the basis of their union membership. This is right in the federal law. It says it's illegal for an employer to discriminate in terms and conditions of employment, to encourage union membership or discourage union membership. So that means an employer cannot say you get an extra $1 an hour, but not if you're a union member. Or say you don't get seniority unless you're a union member. The employer basically has to treat union members and non-members equally. And that's including if you're represented by a union. So for example, if some of you, I understand, work in unionized facilities, anything provided by the employer under the contract has to be provided equally, regardless of whether you're a union member or a non-member. So if the contract requires a particular wage rate, pension, shift, whatever it is, the employer has to provide that to you regardless of whether you're a member or non-member. And this includes, this sometimes becomes a question, pensions and health care. It becomes a question because oftentimes the health care, the pension will come through something with a union name attached to it. For example, it'll be the Teamsters Pension Fund. And however, it might say Teamsters Pension Fund, but legally it's a separate organization from the Teamsters. Trust funds are subject to a whole lot of federal laws. And bottom line is they're separate from the union itself, and because the employer pays for those benefits, those funds cannot discriminate based on union membership or non-membership. So bottom line is, if you decide to become a non-member of a union in a unionized facility, it should not jeopardize your health benefits or your pension benefits. They have to treat you equally whether you're a union member or not. But now where union membership can affect you is with internal union affairs. In that circumstance, inside the union can treat you differently if you're not a member of the club. So for example, these are some of the things the union can deprive you of if you decide to not become a member. The union can exclude you from meetings, because union meetings are an internal union affair. The union can say you can't vote on union officers or officials, because that's an internal union affair. This one's somewhat counterintuitive, but you can be denied the right or ability to vote on the contract. Now you think that affects employment, so that should be tied to the employer, but for a variety of reasons the court have said no. That's an internal union question. So if you decide to not be a member of the union, almost certainly you will not be allowed to vote on the union contract. And you can also be denied any benefits that are provided by the union. Again, not by the employer, but by the union. So if the union offers special deal on credit cards or things to that effect, they can restrict that just to their members and not have that available to you if you choose to become a non-member of the union. However, if you're a non-member of the union, you're also not affected by any internal union obligations, because being a union member also carries certain responsibilities. And in particular, unions, almost all unions, have the authority to fine and discipline their members for what they consider conduct unbecoming a union member. So for example, if you're a union member and you cross a union picket line, you're subject to the union rules which says that's conduct unbecoming a union member. they can fine you money and actually enforce that in court. Because if you're a union member, you've agreed by virtue of your membership to abide by the union's rules and bylaws. However, if you're not a union member, those don't apply to you. If you're not a member of the club, you're not subject to the club's rules, so to speak. So just to briefly summarize, with respect to membership, everyone has the right to be a member or non-member. It should not legally affect your relations with your employer, but if you choose to become a non-member, you can be deprived any internal union benefits or excluded from internal union affairs. So now the second topic is, what are your rights concerning union dues and fees? Now, if you choose to become a union member, it's very simple. You have to pay full union dues. If you join the club, you have to agree to pay whatever the dues structure is that the union or its membership agrees to require. That's relatively straightforward. If you choose to become a non-member, it depends on whether or not you're covered by a right to work law or not, because that changes it. In short, if you're not covered by a right to work law, you can be forced to pay a particular fee as a condition of your employment. If you are covered by a right to work law, you can't. And I'll go into a little more detail in a moment. But the reason I have to explain both is, of course, as everyone is probably aware, Michigan passed a right to work law. However, this law only becomes effective for contracts that are executed or enter into after the effective date of the right to work law, which is March of 2013, March 28th technically. So if you're working under a contract that was signed before March of 2013, you are not covered by the right to work law until that contract either expires or is modified in some way. So for many of you in this room, some of you may be covered by the right to work law, some of you may not. So I'll explain your rights under both. Now first, if you're not yet covered by a right to work law, you can be required to pay what's called a service fee. And this is part of the collective bargaining agreement the union would negotiate. Sometimes this clause is called a union security clause. Union shock clause is another name. And what it basically requires is, as a condition of employment, you must pay dues and fees to the union to keep your job. And that's a legal agreement, and it is binding. And so if you are subject to one of those agreements, you're not covered by a right to work law, what the union can require that you pay is what's called a service fee or a BEC fee. Now that's not equal to full union dues. It's a percentage of dues. And basically the union has to calculate each year a fee that reflects its costs of contract administration and grievance adjustment, but that excludes things unrelated to collective bargaining, like politics and organizing, for example. And to give an example what the service fee would look like for the UAW for a fiscal year, which goes from October 2014 to October 2015, their BEC fee or service fee is 68% of full union dues. So if right now you are represented by the UAW, chose to become a non-member, but you're not covered by right to work yet, you would have to pay at least a fee equal to 68% of full union dues to keep your job.
Excuse me, Bill. I just want to mention that's exactly the position I'm in right now. I'm paying the BEC fee, and I'm going to pass this magazine around. It's the Solidarity magazine that the UAW puts out, and they're required to notify their members of their ability to file as a BEC objector. And it's in this magazine from last July and August. And I'll just pass it around. I've been showing people at the plant that we have that ability. It's legal. It's right there in the UAW's own magazine. It explains to you how to do it. So please pass that around after you take a look at it. Thanks.
And so that's the requirement for the service fee, and I'll explain in the sort of the last section of how to exercise that right if you so choose. And then the final option is if you're a non-member covered by a right to work law. In short, you're not required to pay any fees to the union as a condition of employment, because there's a lot of information about what the right to work laws do and don't do, but in reality they only do one thing as an effective matter, and that makes it illegal to require that you pay union dues or fees as a condition of employment. Or in other words, they make union shop clauses or union security clauses illegal. So if you're covered by a right to work law, there should not be any provision in your contract that says you have to pay dues or fees as a condition of your employment. So in short, just to summarize this section, if you're a union member, you have to pay full union dues. If you're a non-member not covered by right to work, you have to pay at least a service fee. And if you're a non-member covered by right to work, you can't be required to pay anything as a condition of employment. And now finally, the last topic I want to address is how to exercise these rights if you choose. And again, on this, I want to emphasize this is just a general overview of how to do it. For each individual and each individual union, the procedure may be somewhat different, because unions have different procedures sometimes of how to exercise their rights. or these different rights. So again, it's a general overview. So to become a union member is usually straightforward. Simply contact a union official and they'll tell you how to do it. Usually it requires signing a union membership agreement in which you agree to abide by the union's constitution and bylaws and be a union member. If you wish to be a non-member, first, if you never joined the union in the first place, you're already a non-member. Until you join the club, you're not a member. However, if you're currently a member of the union and wish to become a non-member, you can exercise that right simply by sending a resignation letter. As discussed earlier, restrictions on resignation of membership are illegal. Individuals have the right to resign their membership at any time and with few to any restrictions. The only restriction, so to speak, that can sometimes be required is unions can sometimes require that the letters be addressed to certain offices. So for example, sometimes you couldn't send a letter to the company saying I resign. The union will say, no, you have to tell us that you resign.
Okay, excuse me again, Bill. I've got a sample of the letter I sent in to the UAW International. It's just a sample. I'm not encouraging anybody to, send one in themselves, but this is what I sent in, and the address up at the top of it that you'll see is the actual address at the International that I sent mine to, and to claim my Beck rights, and that my union dues were reduced about 2 months later. I'm now a non-member Beck objector, and that's how I did it, by sending that letter to the Solidarity House, UAW International.
Yes. Which sort of brings to the third point is, so that's resignation of membership. What if you're not covered by a right to work law and you also want to pay the reduced service fee? That also requires sending something to the union saying, yes, I want to be a service fee payer, or a Beck objector, as Brian put it. There's a lot of different terminology, but that's basically what it's called. This can both be done at the same time. It's not like a two-step process. You send one letter saying, I hereby resign and want to be a Beck objector. Usually there's few restrictions, but again, one of them is that the union can and often does require that these letters be sent to a particular office. So just to use the UAW for an example, because Brian has passed that around, the UAW requires that all service fee requests be sent to the International instead of to the local, because the UAW International has decided to administer that for all the locals instead of each local trying to do it. So if you want to become a service fee payer of the UAW, again, there's a Beck notice that the union puts out that says where to send that letter. And then at that time, your fee should be reduced. And then finally, how do you exercise your right to work if you're covered by a right to work law? And quite frankly, you just need to be a non-member. You don't need to request it, because if you're a non-member, once you're covered by a right to work law, there's no longer anything in the contract that basically gives the union the right to force you to pay any fees as a condition of your employment. However, there is one potential roadblock, and this will really vary by every individual. And this is what's called a dues deduction agreement. Now, what's a dues deduction agreement? A dues deduction agreement, it's also sometimes called a dues checkoff, is an agreement with your employer in which you agree to allow your employer to deduct union dues directly from your paycheck. So for many of you who are union members, you probably don't send a check to the union every month. The union dues are just taken directly out of your paycheck. Well, if that's true, you needed to have signed an agreement at one time agreeing to it. Under federal law, they can't just take money out of your paycheck without your written authorization. Now, most likely, if you became a union member, you probably signed a dues deduction agreement at the exact same time. Usually they're on the same piece of paper, and a lot of times it's done during hiring. Like when you were hired, filling out tax forms, different things, one of those things will be a dues deduction agreement. Now, where this can become an obstacle if you choose to exercise your right to work is sometimes these dues deduction agreements say, I agree to have dues deducted from my paycheck even if I become a non-member of the union. So now you've agreed to pay even if you resign. And further, some of these also have window periods on revocation. They'll say, I agree to pay dues even if I resign my membership, irrevocable for 1 year, and only revocable during a certain window period. And if that is in fact what the agreement says, it's very possible that even if you're covered by a right to work and become a non-member, they have your written agreement to allow dues to be deducted from your paycheck until you revoke that dues deduction agreement. Now, this again varies by what that dues deduction agreement you signed says. The contract language controls everything. If it doesn't say, I agree to pay even if I become a non-member, then that should be revocable the second you become a non-member, because it only applies to union dues. Or if it doesn't have a window period, then it's revocable at will. But if it does say, it applies even if you become a non-member and has a window. Most likely, you will need to hit that window period to revoke it. So in other words, even if you become a non-member, but a dues deduction agreement has that language I just discussed, until you revoke that agreement, the employer will keep taking the dues out of your paycheck because they have your agreement to do so. So for those of you who are considering exercising your right to work, I would strongly advise asking the company for a copy of any dues deduction agreement you signed and take a look at the language and see what it says. And for those who may need more assistance on trying to interpret and such, you can contact the National Right to Work Foundation. As Brian mentioned, we're a legal aid charity. We give free legal aid and information to individual employees about a variety of matters, this being one of them. And so if you're like, I don't know how this works, what do I have to do? Give us a call or send us an email. We'll look at it and try to tell you what your obligations may be with respect to this dues deduction authorization. And so just, again, to briefly summarize, become a union member, ask the union how to do it. Usually it's just signing a card. To resign, simply send a letter to the union. To resign and become a service fee payer, if not covered by a right to work law, you have to send a service fee request or objection to where the union says to send it to. And to exercise your right to work, you simply have to be a non-member, but the dues deduction agreement, if you signed one, can become an obstacle to you exercising that right. And so with that, that's just the general overview of your rights, and I believe after Brian makes a few more remarks, we'll answer any other questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Bill. One thing that's important to remember, and I forgot to mention this in the earlier town hall, is this. Even though you may have a certain time frame, a small window to resign from the union, to get them to, you don't have a window to resign from the union, but to get them to stop paying your dues, taking the dues out of your check, there may be a small window. If you decide to rejoin the union at a later date, which is something that you need to keep in mind. I mean, I'm talking about using your right to work rights as leverage. So I can see a hypothetical situation where a couple hundred people resign over this money that was spent out of our strike fund in protest. Our dues get reduced back down to the traditional 2 hours a month that they always had been, and then bingo, most of these people sign back up and begin paying dues again because they've accomplished what they wanted to accomplish by exercising their right to work. So you have to keep in mind that getting back in is easier than getting out. You can get back in at any time. Now there might be a small reinstatement fee. I think at our plant in UAW they've posted notices lately that it's $40, but that's inconsequential to us. We're making good money, and that's less actually than 1 month's dues that we have been paying. So to get back in would be easy, relatively inexpensive. So keep that in mind. If you do decide to exercise your right to work and resign from the union and stop paying dues, it's very easy to get back in. It's not a lifetime decision. It's not something that's irrevocable. You can get out to accomplish what you want to accomplish, use it as a leverage tool to get the union bosses to understand what your concerns are, and then if you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, get back in the union down the road if you choose to. Again, those are all your decisions. That's your right, that's your freedom, that's your decision. All we're trying to do here today is make you aware of the fact that you do have an option, you do have those rights, and they can be used in a positive and constructive way. Okay, now I want to give you 2 quick scenarios about how I think we could use our right to work leverage to help ourselves as workers. And I've talked about empowerment, how right to work I feel empowers workers in a union workplace. I'll give you a first example is this $300 million they spent out of our strike fund. Virtually everybody I've talked to feels that was wrong, and even a lot of the folks in the union that I've talked to about it shake their heads and say, that was mishandled, I don't like the way it was done, should have been done differently, I don't like it, I don't agree with it. Okay, well what I'm proposing is this. Right to work becomes effective for us UAW members this September 15th when our current contract expires. We will then be free to exercise our right to work rights if we decide to. I would propose that we draft a letter, and I'd be willing to do this for anybody willing to sign it, and they could sign on, and I would hope to get, and for something like this, I would hope to get a couple hundred people to sign on between my plant and the Van Dyke plant, maybe the Romeo plant. we could circulate it until we had a couple hundred signatures. We don't need 1,000 signatures or whatever, but we need enough to make it representative of a broad base of the employees at several plants, so that the UAW leadership recognizes that this is a concern of the membership, and say, you know, you guys spent these $300 million of our strike money. It was money taken out of our paychecks, set aside for a potential strike in case we went on strike. And then you voted to have us pay it back by increasing our dues to 2.5 hours a month. For the first time in 50 years, they wanted to raise the number of hours they took from us per month. Previously, they'd always gotten their revenue increases by getting us base pay raises. So if we were making $20 an hour and they got us a base pay raise in a contract that brought us up to $22 an hour at the end of the contract, now all of a sudden our 2 hours at the end of the month is worth $44 to the union leadership as opposed to $40. That's how the revenue increases always came in the past. They negotiated base pay raises for us, their revenue went up, everybody was happy. Well, the last 2 contracts we haven't gotten raises. We even had a pay freeze for the last couple of years of the previous contract, and from what I've been reading in the papers, the union is already telegraphing to us that we better not expect a raise in the coming contract. I think personally, my personal view is we'll be lucky if we get our cost of living increases back. So I'm not too hopeful we're going to be getting a base pay raise in the coming contract. So my proposal is this. We send a letter to the International, a couple hundred UAW members sign it, and they say, we would like our dues reduced to the traditional 2 hours a month, like they had been for some 50 years, the day after the new contract is ratified, because I'm assuming at that point we have either not struck, or maybe we had a one-day strike, they didn't have to deplete a strike fund, and that fund then will have, if we don't strike and deplete it, we'll have 4 more years to continue to grow at the rate it was growing at before, and it had grown up to over $900 million sitting there in that fund. It'll be able to replenish itself at the traditional 2 hours a month that they were taking from us. It doesn't need to be at the elevated level. The threat of a strike in this contract negotiation is over, and there's no reasonable argument to keep our dues at 2.5 hours a month. Of course, they would like to keep it up at 2.5 hours a month because it's more money in their pockets, but our argument and our position as union members should be, get your dues revenue increases by getting us base pay raises. It works for both of us that way. You get your revenue increase, we get our base pay increase. It's the way it's always been. Now, whether that's realistic or not going forward in the auto industry, I don't know, but that should be our position. We don't want to give more because they've been getting us less. We're not getting raises, so they want to take more from us. You know, the company's been taken from us, now the union's in our pockets to take more money too. That's not the way to run the union, in my opinion. Now, again, that's just my opinion. So my proposal is, I'll draft a letter, and we can do this over the next month or 2, circulate the letter, get as many signatures as possible. I'll find out who to address it to down at the International, and we send it saying we want our dues reduced back down to 2 hours a month effective September 16th. If you don't, we now know that we can legally resign from the union and stop paying any dues after this contract expires. We know we can do it legally. We know we will not risk losing anything. We're still going to be covered by the contract. We won't lose any of our retirement benefits. It's all been explained to us. We attended a town hall where a legal attorney explained our legal rights and protections. We know we can do it. We're armed with this information now, and we're telling you what we want you to do, and if you don't accomplish what we want you to do, we'll stop paying you. That is how I think we can use right to work to our advantage as workers. I think the union would be improving in that process too, even though they wouldn't like it, but what they did, I think, was corrupt, taking that money and spending it and then telling us to pay it back. So if they were to come around and reduce our dues back where they belong, where they've been for 50 years, I think that would be a good thing for the union. So that's my proposal. That's one way to use right to work law to benefit us as workers. Second quick example, and this I'll make even shorter. If I were an entry-level employee, for example, right now in a UAW represented plant, I'm not, but hypothetically, if I were making $10 an hour less than the person I was working next to, I would draft a letter to the International, and again, I would circulate it and get as many signatures of entry-level, two-tier employees as possible and say, we want you to make eliminating the two-tier pay gap your number one priority in the coming contract negotiations. I'm currently working next to seniority employees who make $10 an hour more than me, and I want to see that gap eliminated over the next 4 years. I think it's realistic to think it could be done. It may not be as realistic to think that it will be done, but I think when you go into contract talks and negotiations, you don't set your goal at what you think you're going to end up at. You set your goal high, you negotiate hard, and you end up somewhere in the middle. That's what collective bargaining is all about, and I think we need to use that process to our advantage. Another thing I think unions are founded on, and this is nothing that I'm disagreeing with the union on, is banding together and protecting the disadvantaged, the little guy, the guy who's maybe being taken advantage of by the company. Well, right now, we have two-tier workers, entry-level employees who are making less than non-union workers down south. And we could debate that all day long, but I'm telling you from the information I've read, the non-union members, a lot of them, the full-time ones down south, are making more than our entry-level new hire two-tier people. So I don't think that's right. And if I were a two-tier employee right now at Ford Motor Company, I would be pushing as hard as I could to get the UAW to try to negotiate to eliminate that two-tier pay gap. Now, realistically, what I think would probably end up happening, say you send that letter in, you say, I want $2.50 an hour raise each year of the 4 years of the contract, which would bring me up $10 and put me at full pay parity with my coworkers. That may not happen, in my opinion. What would probably come out of those contract talks is just a guess, but I would imagine they might get halfway there, which would put them up around the 23, 24, 24 something an hour wage, not quite up to our $28, $29 an hour wage that the seniority UAW workers are getting, but it would be about halfway, and it would put them at pretty much pay parity with the non-union auto workers down south. I think they're in the low to mid 20s. They're called production team members, and they don't do it quite the way the UAW represented employees do, with every worker in a classification making exactly the same. They have windows, and there's a little bit of merit involved in there, and seniority. They can move up or down within that window. But they're in the low to mid 20s, and I think our two-tier people, if there's going to be two-tier, and that's again up to our negotiators, need to work on getting our entry-level people at least up to that level that the non-union workers are making down south. I think that's a reasonable expectation, so I'm looking for that. So that would be my second proposal as a way to use the right to work leverage to our advantage. And we would, again, say if this isn't, the entry-level people could say, if this isn't accomplished in these coming contract talks, and you don't bring us a contract back that goes as far as you can towards eliminating the two-tier pay gap, I will resign from the union and stop paying any dues. I know how to do it, I know I can legally do it, and I'm willing to do it. So we want you to make this your top priority. Those are two quick examples of how right to work can work for us. I think if the union was receptive to that pressure and they tried to do both of those things, they would be better for it. They would show that they're an organization worthy of dues being paid to them. And that would be the way to respond to right to work, not by criticizing or saying we're trying to destroy unions or wreck unions. So those are my opinions. I've talked about it with quite a few people at my plant, and people seem to agree. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people seem to understand that logic there of how you could use our right to stop paying dues to get the union to do what you want them to do. And in the process, the union might become stronger, better, more popular, and so on and so forth. So those are just two quick examples. All right, now I'm going to open it up to questions. It's about 20 to 5. We figured this meeting would go till about 5 o'clock, but we can run over if we have a lot of questions. So let's go ahead. Ted, go ahead. You had your hand up first.
Yeah, you mentioned the two-tier pay scale, and we could agree on this that there is no solidarity in tiers, and I'm 100% agree with that. Let's adjust for a minute. Unions take a hardline stance on that, and let's say it becomes a strikeable issue. How do we win in the court of public opinion when we do that, when all we do is get our asses kicked every time we do? And who do you think would be kicking our ass? The conservatives or the Democrats?
Well, you know,
Hold on, this is a multi-part, question,
Alright.
all right?
my memory's not very good. so-
Now again, weighing the court of public opinion is good for a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons. One of those is car sales. If we're happy with the companies, we're happy with the unions, I may be inclined to buy an American-made, union-built vehicle. But when the unions take hardline stances, as you're suggesting that we do, and I would love to do it.
I'm just talking about negotiating goals.
Negotiating goals would mean taking a hardline stance to get that done. Ron.
No, what I said was I think we would probably end up somewhere in the middle, and I think I said that I figured we'd probably be able to get, if we set our goals high to eliminate that gap, that we could probably get those two-tier people up to that mid-20s range where their non-union workers are down south.
Let me get the response to my question if I could, all right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about winning the court of public opinion. Unions have had a hard time doing that these days. Okay.
And I think it's their own fault.
They've had help, but they're having a hard time, and any time that the unions do take a hardline stance, they do fight for something they're perceived as greedy, overpaid, and so forth, and we all know how that goes.
Mhm.
So my question to you is, how do the unions get more for their members, take hardline stances as you're suggesting that they do, and not lose the court of public opinion?
Well, I don't think it would be that unpopular in the court of public opinion. Hold on, let me finish my response here, Ted.
And by the way, if I could, I'm not drinking the same water you are, if you notice, because I'm a little afraid, buddy.
Ted, see, this is the kind of stuff I deal with all day at work. He's afraid to drink the water here. It's Sterling in water.
I brought my own.
Okay,
Let me see.
I don't think it would be necessarily unpopular in the court of public opinion for the unions to try and eliminate the two-tier pay gap that they currently have if more seniority legacy employees, which is what they call me now because I'm at the higher pay, not the lower tier, if we were out there in public, and I'm willing to, I'm not speaking for all seniority employees, but I'm willing to tell you what my opinion is. Unions are all about protecting the little guy, the disadvantaged, in my mind. I've seen it work the other way in my time in unions, and UAW isn't the only union I've ever been in. I was screwed, if you'll excuse the terminology, in my last union. But I think we need to stick up for the little guy that's being taken advantage of, and to have workers at the UAW represented plants that are hired in and make less than non-union workers down south, I don't think that's good for the UAW's image, especially if they're trying to expand and grow, because people say, well, why should I pay dues to an organization that's going to give me less pay than workers down south who are non-union? So I think if seniority employees like myself came out and said, look, I haven't had a raise in 2 contracts in a row, and we had a pay freeze coming into those 2 contracts, so it's been over 8 years, it's been about 10 since I've had a base pay raise. Here's what I'd be willing to do. I would be willing to sit still and take no base pay increase for the 3rd straight contract. That would be coming close to 15 years without a raise, Ted. If the company would be willing, over a 4-year period of that contract term, to bring the lower tier workers up to my pay and put them at pay parity. I'll sit still where I'm at if you'll bring them up in 4 steps to make them paid even with me. All I would be looking for is to get my cost of living increases
I
back.
thought you believed in what the market bears. I thought you were a true capitalist.
I am a true
Okay,
capitalist.
well then, what does
But
the
we're
market
talking
bear?
about negotiating. Ted, we're talking about
We're
negotiating.
going to negotiate what the
So,
market bears, bro.
right, so that'll be the company side, but you don't go in siding with your opponent in negotiations. I pay dues, what the union sells is negotiating the best they can get for their employees, I understand that. By their very nature, they want more, more, more. You know, GM and Chrysler both went bankrupt, not just because of the unions, but labor costs were a big part of it. So you gotta factor that in, you gotta be reasonable about what's long-term sustainable, but I don't think it would be viewed as negative in the court of public opinion to say, okay, the UAW wants to bring these lower tier people up to what the seniority employees were making 10 or 11 years ago. I don't think that's going to be viewed that negatively in the court of public opinion. Okay, any other, next question? Come on, you guys got to have some. Joe.
You know, I am a backup objector,
Mhm.
so I pay the reduced
Yep.
dues. So now, I'm reading the article in the Beacon that says, should there be a strike, and this is a contract year, you have to
Yeah.
be a member in good standing to collect your $200 a week.
Right, and you also have to walk the picket
It's
line.
250.
So does that mean, okay, 250, so does that mean they don't have to pay me?
Right, they don't have to pay you, no, they don't have to pay you. Yeah, even though that's, your money was going into that fund,
Right.
and they spend it on other stuff without your approval, yeah, you're not gonna get paid. So the union gets away with some of that stuff.
All right, so let me ask you this then. You know how your back letter has to be renewed every year?
Right,
Okay, so let's say, for example, my back renew would come up in October. And let's just say I get back into the union and they go on strike in November. Do they still have to pay me the 200, or are they gonna come to me?
if you walk the picket line, I believe, isn't that the requirement, Ted?
Or are they gonna come to me and say, you gotta pay back the $22 a month that you did pay us for the past year?
No, I don't think that would be the case, would it, Bill? He wouldn't have to repay the
No.
time he's been out of the union, no.
No,
If
and
you were-
also with respect to the strike fund, it depends if you are paying to the strike fund as a BEC objector. If they required as a BEC objector that you pay for the strike fund, you are actually entitled to those strike benefits.
How would I
But-
find that out though?
It may be in the financial report that the union sends to BEC objectors each year, sort of the financial packet. And so if you're required to pay for that as a BEC objector, you're entitled to the benefit. On the other hand, if that's something they excluded, from the BEC fee, then that's true, you're not entitled to
Because
it.
you are still paying something, the agency fee, and part of that might go towards, funding the strike fund. So then you would be obligated, yeah, thanks, Bill. I have no idea, but Bill gave you your answer.
Well,
still
what
have-
a answer could possibly
I
be.
do have that packet at home, and
Yeah,
quite a digested package.
it's an audit.
Yes. Okay, next question over here.
You talked about drafting a letter,
Yes.
about the proposal.
Yes.
Of the union dues.
Mhm.
Who would you send that to, Dennis Williams?
Well, there's probably an office, there's probably a committee. I mean, Ted might know a little more about how the International operates down there. There's probably an office within the International down there that would handle that. But I would have to do a little research, make a few phone calls, and find out who to direct that to. I'm sure it would find its way into the right hands if we sent it. But the first step would be to draft the letter and make sure everybody was okay with the wording, and then circulate it and get the signatures. And I don't think it's an outrageous request or proposal. I think it's a common sense proposal. After the contract talks are over, we ratify the new contract, what's the rationale for keeping our dues up at 2.5 hours a month? You don't need to replenish the strike fund by next year. Just over the next 4 years, we need to get it back up to a healthy level. So I think that's a reasonable proposal. I think it's a good idea, and it addresses one of the main issues that has union members, at my plant at least, very upset about the treatment they've gotten from the union. Follow up?
With the $300 million that you said they spent,
Mhm.
was that on organizing, or what was that, where did that money go to?
Well, I don't know exactly where it went to. I know it went to a variety of places, but that figure comes from the union itself. They sent out notice last year, probably a little over a year ago, that they had spent that money, and it was spent on a variety of things. Organizing was one of them. I have read that, but it doesn't take $300 million to set up an office in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and buy stationery and pens and hook up a phone. You better believe a lot of that money went to, dinners
Other
and,
interests.
travel and parties and different things.
So there was $900 million in that strike.
Well over 900 million.
Okay, with that being said, since Ford hasn't been on strike since 1976, right? Where's that other
Well, it's not
$600
just
million?
Ford. It's not just Ford.
Oh,
UAW,
right.
yeah, I'm sure that's,
Chrysler.
right. There's a big pool there of people they represent. So I don't know, who has been on strike, but I know there were no major long-term strikes that were drawing off of that over the past, few years. But the point being, there were hundreds of millions of dollars in that fund. The rationale they gave for increasing our dues was to replenish the fund because contract talks were coming up this year. They're going to start here in a month or two informally, and then they'll really kick in 3 or 4 months. So after this contract comes and goes and we ratify a new contract, if we haven't gone on strike, there's really no rationale for accelerating the replenishing of that strike fund. That thing will build itself back up slowly over the years, and by the next into the 4-year contract cycle, I imagine we'll have added, tens of millions of dollars, or at least several $1 million back to it, and we'll be back up, you know, over 700 million or whatever it is.
Right, I get that, but what I wanna know is the 600 million, and then if we add more and more to this
Yeah.
strike fund, where's it being held, and what is that money, who's dipping into that money, what's happening to that money?
Well, you know, we don't know, we don't get that kind of detailed information down at the union member level. I know big funds like that, whether it's a pension fund or the strike fund or different types of funds like that, have to be monitored. There's certain federal laws that apply to it. Bill could probably answer some of that stuff, but there's trustees who are appointed to invest it. You know, it's got to be held in a relatively
Who
safe.
else have you asked? Besides Brian?
That's, every time I
You go
try
to
to
union
ask
meetings and
somebody,
ask?
nobody, they.
You're not getting your answer, not getting the answers?
No, I'm not getting
Okay.
answers.
Yeah.
It's, you can think it's like our FIBA money, right? It was the union, the company, and then a third party.
Yeah.
Who's the third party?
When this is done, I'll give you some answers.
Okay, great,
Okay.
thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
This might be for Bill, but I'm a skilled trades member, and what is the, I prefer to also be a union member, and what is the legality of getting different representation? Like, if, let's just say a group of skilled tradesmen got together and did decide that they just didn't want the UAW representation, we want representation.
Sure.
Right, but we want someone who's
Like
gonna actually listen
IBEW
to
or
us.
the other trades unions.
Well, I just want someone who's gonna look out for our best
Sure.
interests, so what's,
Bill, you know, that's, there's legislation being talked about in Lansing right now in Michigan that would open that up. I don't know what the term is for that with the competition. What prevents that right now? Exclusive representation agreements or, because the trades, and I've said this for a long time, you guys have kind of, in my opinion at least, gotten the short end of the stick being lumped in with
yeah.
the hourly people, and it's caused a lot of friction at the plants. I think the trades deserve to be represented by a different union or unions, and I think you guys would be in a lot better shape. I don't know if it would be the regular trade unions, the IBEW for electricians or whoever, but somebody with a little separate agreement so you guys weren't so, I mean, you only make a couple bucks an hour more than us,
Right.
and really, you guys are skilled guys. You'd probably be doing better on the outside if you had, you know, worked as many hours as you do in the plant.
Well, I work for Ford as well, and we're losing those skills because we don't do a lot of the work anymore, you know, so,
Yeah.
so that, anyways, it's
Gener-
either here or there, so my
Sure.
point was, so there is something right now preventing
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yes, generally speaking, you can't break apart the bargaining unit once it's established.
Yeah.
The only exception to that may apply to you is there's something in the law that allows professional employees to be separate from non-professional employees. Now, I can't say off the top of my head whether your particular job classification is considered professional. It requires a certain degree of skills that's a lot different from the rest of the bargaining unit. Like a typical example would be radiologists at a hospital and, you know, the people who clean the bedpans. You know, that would be different enough that the radiologist might be able to break off. But assuming that it's not, you generally can't break the bargaining unit. So if the bargaining unit is wall-to-wall, all production employees that have a range of skills, generally the only way to change the union is to change the entire bargaining unit. You can't crack off a piece of it. I'm sorry, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead, Norm.
I know a guy who transferred from here to Georgia and then to Kansas, a GM employee. And they're both right-to-work states, and he had a choice of no union or union of one state. The other state, he had a choice of 3 different unions or no union. And we also know a teacher at the American Federation of Teachers, teaches in the Hampton County School District, who taught in Texas, and she had a choice of 3 different unions or no union at all. And both of them said the union dues were much less, they got better service because
Yeah.
they had a choice of
Competition.
leaving, there's more competition. So why can't they be done here under Michigan's law?
Well,
I mean, I've heard a little bit, like the guy who disrupted the meeting earlier, he had pictures of me with Senator Jack Brandenburg. I used to be Jack's district aide, and I'm no expert on what this gentleman's, or what Norm's asking or talking about, but I was kind of under the assumption that state law, you know, dictated that, and there's legislation being discussed here in Michigan now that would open that up to allow multiple unions to represent workers in the same workplace.
generally, sorry.
Yeah, the Ross Common School District, the teachers left the MEA and formed their own union.
Yeah, and
Yeah, but that's one district, Norm. I think district by district, one can be AFT, one can be MF.
Why could the skilled workers at Sterling or whatever do the same thing they wanted to?
the answer is
Well, they're in the same bargaining unit, though. I guess my guess, and I'll let Bill address it, he's the lawyer, but my guess would be school district to school district is like plant to plant, and, you know, I mean, it's, if these guys are, you know, the skilled trades guys where he works, they're in the same plant with all the hourly workers, and I mean, I don't know what the exact, you know, legal requirements are, but I think the legislation's being discussed right now in Lansing that would open that process up to allow competition among unions to be able to represent workers in the same workplace. But
well, generally speaking, in the private sector is almost completely controlled by federal law, and state law usually can't affect it. So if you're a private sector employee, you're most likely covered by the National Labor Relations Act, which is federal, or if you work for an airline or a train service, by the Railway Labor Act. States cannot pass laws that interfere with either of those acts. Now, public employees, like public school teachers,
yeah.
are subject to state law. So each state law could be whatever it wants. So for example, Texas might not even have collective bargaining there. So each union is literally a club. There isn't exclusive representation. But a company like Ford is certainly covered by the National Labor Relations Act, and that basically has that concept of exclusive representation. And once a union is an exclusive representative of a particular bargaining unit, that bargaining unit is it as far as if you want to decertify it.
Isn't that negotiated with each contract? I mean, if
No,
the
it's,
members decide they don't want that provision anymore, they don't want to pay the so-called freeloaders, they don't want the exclusive bargaining right, they don't want to be responsible for people that aren't members, don't they have the right to do that?
well, only if they do it under, basically they'd have to decertify the union. Or the union would have to voluntarily give up its status, but they couldn't do it as part of the contract, so to speak. Because once an employer says, you are an exclusive representative, or if a union wins an election, it says the union is now the exclusive representative. As a matter of law, the union is the exclusive representative, period. Even if there's no contract, until there's either a decertification election or something else to that effect, which removes the union's exclusive status. Or again, the union can voluntarily give up that power if it so chose. But the rank and file, unless it convinces the union to give up the power, can't just say, no, you're not exclusive anymore. It requires either a federal process, a decertification election, or a decertification card check, or the union to voluntarily give it up. Under private sector. Public sector, every state law is different. So Lansing could pass laws changing exclusive representation amongst public school teachers. It can do whatever it wants. But when it comes to private sector employees, with rare exceptions, federal law controls, unfortunately.
does anybody else have a question? Ted?
Your legal opinion, why do you think the law is as it is? Why do you have the right to opt out? How do we, the evolution of that? How do you think it became law in that way? Let me finish the thought before you answer this. It is a law, but how did it become the law? What factors went into it becoming law? What types of factors went into it becoming law?
Sure.
Was it morals? Was it lobbying? Was it Taft-Hartley? What types of things went into this law becoming what it is? How did it evolve?
Just to clarify, right to work
Just your
or,
legal opinion.
yes, but I'm just,
Yes,
right to work or the Beck rights?
Right to work.
Right to work, okay, because the Beck rights came a different way through a legal path, through constitutional case law. The right to work laws, after the Wagner Act was passed, basically required more or less a closed shop. But some states began to pass laws saying, no, not in our state, you can't have a closed shop. And the Supreme Court upheld those laws and said, federal law doesn't preempt, in other words, doesn't prevent states from regulating in this area. Then the Taft-Hartley Act came along in 1947, and among other things, in the Taft-Hartley Act, they included a provision which said states can pass these right-to-work laws. It's 14B is the name of the section. And so that part of the National Labor Relations Act says nothing in this federal law will prevent any state from passing a right-to-work law if it so chooses. That's not exactly what it says, but that's its effect. And since then, it's become the choice of each state of whether or not they want to pass a right-to-work law or not. but the federal law has opened that door to regulate in that particular area. And how they passed in each state, it depends on each state. I mean, some have been around for a long time, some are recent. And so the political battle in each state is the political battle in each state.
The reason I ask a question like that is because membership. If you have a membership at Costco, or you have a membership at, say, a golf course, you receive things for that membership. There are things that come along with a membership. There are entitlements to a membership. I can't walk onto a golf course, I can't walk into Costco and receive any of those benefits without that membership. That's why I'm asking the question. I don't understand it to be any differently if you're a member of the union. To be entitled to the collective bargaining process if you're not contributory, if you're not part of that bargaining process. And I find that confusing, and how the law evolved that way, it confuses me as to how it could evolve that way when logic to me says that membership, you're providing these things under membership. And if you don't want to be a member, then perhaps another agent can represent you in the same fashion, but the law doesn't provide that. The law provides otherwise, as you just explained. And it baffles me, to be quite honest.
Sure, and I think that goes toward what are the policy arguments for and against a right-to-work law. And I think I'll just lay them out both for and against and let everyone make your own conclusions. So the argument against right-to-work laws is similar to what you said. It's often called the free rider argument. If the union is providing these things under the contract, or at least negotiating for them, it's only fair that everybody pay the union for what it negotiated. Otherwise, people are getting a free ride. That's the terminology used.
I agree.
Yes, I would imagine so. So the argument against that, and there's a couple. The first is that it's the union that chooses to become the exclusive representative. A union doesn't have to represent everyone at the entire plant. It could choose to represent only its members, but it chooses to be the representative of everyone. Which brings to the second point, is that power isn't a liability for a union. It's an incredible power. It gives a union the power to speak on behalf of everyone in the entire bargaining unit, every worker there, whether they like it or not. And that provides a lot of benefits to the union. So the argument that it's horrible that the union has to represent these people, well, it's actually the opposite I submit is true. It's an incredible benefit for the union to be able to say, we represent everyone, whether they like it or not. And then the final argument for right to work is the individual employee didn't get to choose whether they want that representation. If you're employed at a unionized factory, you don't have a choice of whether you want the union to represent you. By virtue of taking that job, you are so represented. And usually, if you don't have a choice as to whether you want something that's ostensibly a benefit, you don't have to pay for it. So just to give an example, if you came home from work today and you found the neighbor painted your shed blue, and your neighbor said, I want $100. I did you a favor, I painted your shed. And he didn't ask you permission. Do you owe him any money? And the answer is no, you didn't ask him to do it. Maybe you didn't like the job he did. And the same principle applies here. Because you don't have a choice of whether or not you want the union contract or not, you shouldn't be forced to pay for it.
Bill, let
And
me
those
add one other example to that might illustrate why I feel that I should be able to do what I'm doing to not have to pay the union. I haven't had a raise in 10 years. I work with people who have a hard time making it to work on time. They come in late. They don't like to work hard while they're there. While on the other hand, even though they make exactly the same wage I do, I show up every day. I've never had an unexcused absence in 18 years. I try hard every day. I give 100% effort, yet I make exactly the same as the guy next to me. So there's advantages and disadvantages to what you're saying. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to having collective bargaining, and unions are agent to do that, and I appreciate what those advantages do for me. But there are also some things that are not so advantageous. Why is the guy next to me making the same wage I am when I'm, a much better employee than he is? So there's examples like that we could use to make our argument too. Any other questions?
Just a comment on that, my
Yeah.
argument to the UAW is make me want you.
Sure.
I elect people and whether they like it or not, the job is serving. That's what you do, you serve the membership. Make me wanna stay,
Yep. Become better and people will want to pay.
Right.
And that's exactly what I was hoping Right to Work would do. Ted, one last comment and then we'll
As the
call
market
it.
would bear, for your skill set that you currently employ, in a non-union shop, doing what you do today, What would you make, and what would your benefits be?
Well, Ted, you're actually making my argument for me. The
Okay.
union overinflated the labor costs of non-skilled workers at Ford Motor Company. Now,
You
we
didn't
still
answer the
make.
question, though.
Hey, Ted, let me answer it the way I'm gonna answer it.
All right,
Now, I haven't had a raise in 10 years, and I'm still making good money. If I work a lot of overtime, I can make ungodly amount of money for the year. I was making that 10 years ago, so they had priced us out of the labor market. That opened up the door for foreign imports, non-union auto workers down south to capture more and more of the market. So there's pros and cons to that argument. We're not gonna debate it.
how can they
We-
price you out of the market,
we
you're
could
asking
sit
for a
here-
raise at the same
We
time,
could sit
Brian?
here all day.
The price of the market, but you're asking for a raise.
We could sit here all day. We debated back and forth, Ted, all week long on Facebook.
ridiculous.
So it's not really a debate. Right to work is the law.
All right?
And we're gonna try to use it, to our advantage now that it's in place.
Can't win.
Bill has explained how to, exercise our rights, and we're armed with that information now. So let's go out there and make our union perform better for us, because we have the knowledge that we're the bosses of our elected union officials, and we know how to leverage that information to make them perform better by threatening to withhold. The only thing they seem to understand is money. So we have that information now. I hope the unions improve, and like you said, provide better service to make us wanna stay. Everybody wins in that situation. It's not an effort to destroy the unions. If they approach it and respond to it properly, it'll improve the unions. So thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody for coming. I appreciate you being here. I wish more people could have came, but you guys did. Please spread the word to your coworkers and let them know what information you got today. I will be putting the DVD of the videotape of this town hall online. It'll be posted on YouTube. If you want to come to my Facebook page, most of you, you remember my name, you've been to the Facebook page already. Come to the Facebook page in a month or so, and I'll probably have some links put on there where you can share this link with other people, and they can get the same information since they weren't able to make it today. But thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate y'all being here.
Hey, oh, absolutely, yeah.